Good afternoon. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. Please note any website or email that I mentioned will be posted in the chat. For those seeking business license assistance, you can visit the Small Business Center here at City Hall or call 312-74-GO-BIZ. Also, business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. To learn more about this program, please visit chicago.gov/business education. This webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. If you'd like to encourage all attendees to ask questions, please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. At this time, I will now turn this webinar over to Greg for us to begin.
Hello, thank you for joining us today for our webinar about shared housing here in the city of Chicago. So before we get into the presentation for shared housing, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Greg Wolford. I'm the business consultant supervisor here at City Hall overseeing the shared housing division. We also have Farah Tanvir, who is our project coordinator overseeing the shared housing division here at the city of Chicago. So you've probably come into contact with either me or Farah in the past several years via email or phone, or even here at the Small Business Center. But we're the two main go-to people for shared housing. So if you have any questions, you can definitely contact us and we'll provide that contact info towards the end. Okay, I believe my screen is being shared. Let me know if it's not. Okay, before we get into the specifics of shared housing, I wanted to talk a little bit about our department, Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, or BACP. So BACP ensures a fair and vibrant marketplace for businesses, workers, and consumers in the city of Chicago. Essentially, any type of business in the city is licensed by our department. So BACP, aside from licensing our businesses and public vehicles, we regulate business activity, we protect consumers from fraud, and for Chicago's labor law partners with business service organizations, and we provide education and resources for businesses, much like the webinar we are hosting right now. Also, here is our Small Business Center. This is kind of the hub for business licensing, and it's housed here at City Hall on the 8th floor. We are the permitting division of the BACP and the city's destination for business licensing, public way use, permitting, and other resources to start and grow your business. So you can definitely visit us here at the Small Business Center and meet with a business consultant, or you can visit us online via Chicago Business Direct and apply for a license that way. Now, let's get into some specifics about shared housing. So the first thing I want to differentiate shared housing is that we are, it's regulated by registration numbers, not licenses. So BACP primarily issues licenses to businesses, but shared housing units primarily are regulated by registration numbers, which are different than licenses. So that's the terminology we'll be using. And in the next couple slides, we'll talk more about registration numbers and the differences from licenses. But before we jump into that, I wanted to really dial it back and get into the basics of a shared housing unit and a shared housing host, and provide you guys with the definitions of what either of these are. The definition of a shared housing unit, without naming all the specifics, but a shared housing unit is a legal dwelling unit in the city of Chicago that is listed on an internet platform like Airbnb or Vrbo for rent for 31 days or fewer. And I want to highlight the 31 days or fewer because that's what distinguishes short-term rentals. So that's a short-term shared housing unit is 31 days or fewer. That's what the registration number is for. That's what it gets you short-term. Anything that's long-term, 32 days or more is not regulated by our department. 32 days or more long-term does not require a registration number. That's out of our purview. At that point, it's similar to landlord-tenant laws. It doesn't fall into shared housing laws or municipal code for shared housing. So that's what a shared housing unit is. A shared housing host operates a shared housing unit, but they are an owner, tenant, or manager that's acting on behalf of the owner or tenant that lists a shared housing unit, which is listed on an internet platform. The important thing to know about a shared housing host is that there needs to be legal access to that unit. So you're either the owner or tenant, you have a mortgage or lease on the property, or you're the manager acting on their behalf, and you have some type of agreement that allows you to list that shared housing unit. I've included some links. I know you can't click on them to the ordinances below. They are listed on our website. You'll see some links throughout the presentation, but all of those are available on our website, which will give you the address to access yourself. There's a couple different numbers that we've highlighted on the right here. These are all numbers from the end of last year of 2022, as of December 31st of 2022. So we had about 3,252 approved registration numbers at the end of last year. In comparison, right now, I checked right before this webinar, and we had about 3,500 approved registration numbers. So, that's the area we're kind of in for the number of registration numbers. At the end of 2022, we also had 2,342 buildings on the prohibited buildings list and 131 restricted residential zones, which are precincts in the city of Chicago that prohibit shared housing. And we'll get into more about the prohibited buildings list and restricted residential zones a little bit later. So the basics for shared housing. When we dial it back and zoom out a little bit, here are the basics for shared housing. So hosts are required to have an approved registration number or vacation rental license number to list a shared housing unit on an intermediary platform like Airbnb or Vrbo. Platforms require the registration number or vacation rental license number to be able to list and advertise their unit on their platform for 31 days or fewer. So we have an agreement with them. They're licensed as intermediary platforms, and they only allow short-term rentals if the city has approved that listing for a registration number or vacation rental license number for short-term rentals. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between registration numbers and vacation rental licenses. Like I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that licenses are different than registrations. The registration number, like my third bullet points out, is the most common form of regulation for shared housing units. The registration number was introduced in 2016 when this ordinance was introduced. So they were introduced concurrently in the same municipal code. And that's when Airbnb and Vrbo, those kind of platforms really became popular and began to take off. So the city then started the regulation, which introduced the registration number. I kind of view it as the old way and the new way. Registration number, the most common one, is the new way. The vacation rental license number is kind of, I view, the old way. It's the way the city regulated short-term vacation homes before platforms like Airbnb or Vrbo even existed. That being said, it does follow the exact same ordinance, the exact same rules, regulations, eligibility requirements as registration numbers. So both of those types of regulation follow the same eligibility requirements, the same short-term rental code, essentially. There are some slight differences. There are some nuances between the two. For example, types of entities that can apply are different. The tax implications are different. Those are the main differences. But for your reference, by comparison, like I mentioned, there's about 3,500 registration numbers right now. In comparison, there's about 100 vacation rental licenses. So there's vastly more registration numbers than there are vacation rental licenses. And most of the existing vacation rental licenses exist because they're grandfathered in from years ago. For the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to talk mostly about the registration number. So this is how you get it. Most of, when I'm referring back to the regulation, I'm talking about the registration number here on out. So to get a registration number to list your unit for short-term rental, everything starts on the shared housing registration portal. That's, where the application go, that's where you start the application. That's where you can find more information. Our contact page is there. So the portal is the starting point for everything. In a very basic term, you start your account on the portal. You complete your account and submit an application to BACP. Once the host has submitted a completed application, we then review the application per our ordinance and send our determination of an approval or denial via email. We also send an approval or denial through, we mail it as well, a hard copy. If approved, the host then is notified that they're approved, but they must make the $125 registration fee payment within 14 days, and that's listed on your approval letter. They must make that $125 registration fee payment, and once that's made, then you immediately get your registration number and can list on the platform right away. You can list on the platform, again, for 31 days or fewer. Essentially, getting the registration number unlocks, in a sense, your listing to be able to list it for 31 days or fewer for short term. The registration number, once it's approved, you make that payment, it displays under My Registrations on your portal. If it's denied, we send you an email and a hard copy as well, with the option to appeal that decision if you feel like we've made the wrong decision. If per the ordinance, you feel that there's some type of incorrect data or something, you can appeal that decision within 10 days, submit that appeal form. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Also, if it's an option, it's listed that you have 30 days to apply for the commissioner's adjustment. That's only offered for certain denial reasons. So not every denial reason has the option to apply for commissioner's adjustment. And just so you're aware, it used to be a 10 days to apply for commissioner's adjustment. That was recently increased to 30 days. So that's also listed on the denial letter as well, that that it's now 30 days to apply for the commissioner's adjustment. Here's a screenshot of the application process. And actually, I want to walk you through a quick submittal for an application. So I'm going to quickly stop share. 1 second. I'm going to go to the registration portal and just walk you through a test of submitting an application, because it's pretty quick. So here's my screen share for the registration portal. So just so you're aware, this is our test environment, so none of this is real. But I'm going to log in. So here's a portal. You can click login here or login here. If you haven't created an account, click on create an account. and it asks you all of the relevant information. I have an account created already, so I'm just going to log in and walk you through it. sharedhousingchicago@gmail.com. Let me type in my password real quick. And log into our account. And here's the dashboard. This is what it looks like when nothing has been done to our account yet. So 2 tiles display right away. You have to finish setting up your account. You have to upload an identity document and enter your mailing address, like your home base address. So I'm going to upload my identity. Document type, it's a driver's license or state ID. I have a sample driver's license I will upload. You can see here it's uploading. Oh, and then submit. And it has been uploaded. We go back to the account dashboard, that tile then goes away. Now let me enter my mailing address. When I created the account, I gave my name. And my address, I'm just going to put the address for City Hall. When you're entering your address, some addresses in the city of Chicago have a half after it. So it's like 121.5 North LaSalle. Most do not, so you can just ignore that. Some obviously are single family homes or townhomes where there's no unit number. So you can click that and that grays out the unit number. But in this case, we'll say, we'll call it unit number 999. And then now I've saved my account information. So let me go back to my account dashboard. I've done everything. I've set up the account already, and now I'm ready to apply for a registration number. All you do is click on apply for registration number, or you can click over here. This takes you to the application. It's a 4-step application, very quick. You can select what email address. I'm just going to use the one I used when I created the account. Save and continue. Step 2. I have 2 options here. I can enter a brand new address. In this case, for the sake of time, I'm just going to use an address from the profile of our previous application that pre-populates what I entered in my account. So save and continue. And step 3 and step 4 collects more information about the property. So it lists the property there. What is your relationship to the property? I'm going to say I own this property. And the next question is this your primary residence? And we'll talk more about the specifics about primary residence. But essentially, it's important to know that primary residence is based on the unit, not the building. So I'm applying for unit 999. So I'm talking about that unit specifically. I could, if I lived in unit 997, that would be my primary residence. So my answer would be no. Primary residence is defined in the ordinance as you live there primarily for at least 245 days out of the calendar year. So it's your primary place of residence. It's where you live most of the time. You can only have one primary residence. That's the definition of primary, is where do you live mostly. So if I say no, that's it. But if I say yes, and I'm claiming it as my primary residence, it then asks you to upload proof of primary residency. I'm going to say yes. I'll upload the sample driver's license again. And these are the document types that are allowable to prove primary residency, which we'll talk about more in the PowerPoint presentation. But I will say it's my driver's license. And then a question, if there are more than 5 or more units in your building. I'm just going to say yes. So obviously you want to answer these correctly, and providing the information for your building. Then in step 4 is where you select which of the licensed platforms you're going to list on. You have to, if you plan on listing on both, you have to select both. For example, if you only select Airbnb, you will not be able to list on Vrbo. Vrbo will not allow you to list on their platform if you don't select it and apply for it. We don't provide them with your information unless you select it. You know, some people do not want to be in Vrbo, so they don't click it. So we will not send that information to Vrbo. But if you do, we'll allow them to, allow you to list on that platform. Another thing, just real quick, Vrbo, HomeAway, Expedia, that's all the same thing. They're all part of the same app. So that's why they're listed together. Dwelling type is entire dwelling or partial dwelling. So essentially that means the entire unit or just a room in your unit. So are you listing, is your listing for the entire house, the entire apartment, or are you staying at your apartment maybe and one room is available, so you're doing partial dwelling? If I do entire dwelling, nothing happens. But say I'm doing partial dwelling, you know, I'm staying at my house and I just want one room to be available for rent. So partial dwelling, more things pop up. There's 2 sleeping rooms in the unit, but I'm going to list one of them. I'm staying in one, I'm gonna list the other room. I'm calling it my guest room, so you can name it whatever you want. And I'm gonna add room. So then that pre-populates the gray box and it says total number of sleeping rooms used for shared housing. So I've only listed one. Say I put the main room also. Then that number goes to 2 and both are listed. But I only want to list the guest room, so I'm going to X that one. Okay, my application is done. Review application. And it has all the answers listed right here, summarized. So you can look at this. If it's correct, you can submit. If you see, oh, I answered wrong, you can go back and make that correction. But we'll say everything was correct. I'm going to submit it. And it says here, 2 sub-applications will be created, one for each combination of room and intermediary platform. So for example, I listed Airbnb and Vrbo. So it's telling me 2 sub-applications are being created, one for Airbnb and one in Vrbo. Submit. And return to dashboard. There you can see that my application has been submitted. The information is right there. Here's a little arrow I can click that lists, it shows the 2 applications for the guest room for Vrbo and Airbnb. They're part of the same application, but they're different line items essentially, but we'll action on them the exact same way. We're just declaring that it's Vrbo and Airbnb. That's why they're grouped together. But that's really it for the application process. So I'm going to stop share and go back to my PowerPoint presentation. And then we'll continue on with that. Oops. Let me go back to where we were. Okay, so that's the application process. Couple things I want to point out about the application process on the portal is definitely use the help tab as a resource. So in this picture right here, there's the help tab and there's how-to guides that have step-by-step instructions, including screenshots of each part. So if you get caught up, definitely use the help tab to see what needs to be done. We've even broken them up on different steps. So like creating your account, uploading your identity, mailing information. So you can easily click on what part of the process you need. There's also many other documents and links that are here. So under additional resources, the quick reference guide, acceptable forms of ID, the prohibited buildings list, all that. So definitely utilize the help tab. Also the contact us tab, if you're experiencing an issue that you need to bring to our attention. I will say using the contact us tab, the best thing to do is to email us. That goes directly to us and we respond to all those emails. Okay, moving right along. So going a little bit deeper into the eligibility requirements for shared housing. So when you submit that application to us, these are some of the common eligibility requirements that you may run into when applying for. So this is part of what we look at to determine what's going to be approved and what's going to be denied per the municipal code. So this is also listed on our website. We've recently redone our website as of a couple months ago. So definitely if you forget this, access our website, chicago.gov/shared-housing. This infographic is there as well. So you can see there's the main eligibility requirements I've broken up into 3 kind of buckets: single family homes, buildings with 2 to 4 units, and buildings with 5 or more units. Really, these first 2 buckets, single family home and buildings with 2 to 4 units, can be combined together. They follow the same eligibility requirements. The first thing when someone's asking me about a question about shared housing, or if I'm determining eligibility, the first thing I ask myself is how many dwelling units are in that building? Are there 4 or fewer, or are there 5 or more? That's the delineating line. If there's 4 units or fewer, the unit you're applying for must be your primary residence to be eligible. Also, if there are 4 units or fewer, include single family homes, the maximum we'll allow is 1 active rental. Even if it's a 2-flat or a 4-flat, and you want all those units to be shared housing units, we'll only approve 1. Okay. This single family homes and buildings that have 4 units or fewer, these requirements are also eligible for commissioner's adjustments. So we'll talk more about that in a second. So potentially, if it's a non-primary primary residency unit in one of these buckets, it could be potentially overturned and approved if you're approved for the commissioner's adjustment. Same thing with exceeding the maximum active rentals, but that's only if you're approved for a commissioner's adjustment. Otherwise, on its face, it must be a primary residence and we'll only approve 1. If it's 5 units or more, the primary residency requirement does not exist. It does not need to be your primary residence. And the way we determine the maximum active rental capacity is a maximum of 1/4 of the total number of dwelling units, or 6 units, whichever is less. So for example, we'll only approve 1 dwelling unit until there's 8 units in the building. Starting at 8 dwelling units, we'll approve 2. Starting at 12 dwelling units, we can approve 3. Starting at 16, we can approve 4, so on and so forth. It's like 1/4 of the number of units in the building. But 6 is always the maximum, regardless of how big the building is. So if the building is 1 million units big, the maximum we'll ever approve is 6. Also, common eligibility requirements: the address cannot be in the prohibited buildings list, and the address cannot be in a restricted residential zone. And again, I have more details on both of those in just a minute. I also included the link to registration number FAQs. Again, I know you can't click on it, but it's on our website, chicago.gov/shared-housing. The FAQs are there. Primary residency. So a little bit more about primary residency. The first thing is that it's based on the unit, not the building. Again, if you live in a 2-flat, but you live in unit 2 and you want to list unit 1 is not your primary residence. So on its face, you'll get denied and you can apply for a commissioner's adjustment to see if you can get an approval. That's per the municipal code. Primary residency, as I mentioned earlier, is defined as a dwelling unit where a person lives on a daily basis at least 245 days in the applicable calendar year. So again, it's where you live most of the time, most of the year. And applicants can only claim one dwelling unit as their primary residence. So you know, to get around this, you can't say unit 1 is my primary residence, but also so is unit 2 because they'll live there some part of the time as well. One can only be your primary. They both might be your residence, but primary residence is what we're looking for. To validate primary residency, we require one of the following outlined in the shared housing rules. So the rules are different than the ordinance, but again, it's on our website and it's more specifics. So these are the 4 documents that we allow to validate primary residency. Driver's license or state ID, the most recent Cook County Treasurer property tax bill that shows the homeowner's exemption is claimed. A bank statement dated within 30 days or an official payroll document dated within 30 days. That's what's allowable. Before, things like utility bill or a lease were acceptable. They're no longer accepted. They're when the rules were promulgated, those were taken off. So these are the 4 items that are allowable to prove primary residency. Again, like a utility bill and lease were accepted before, but we all know that, you know, that those documents show that you might have a residence there, but it doesn't show that it's your primary residence. Okay, some other things are the prohibited buildings list, which we refer to as the PBL. Authorized agents of any building can add their building to the PBL via a notarized affidavit. And once that building is added to the PBL, it's a list that we maintain. If we get an application for that address, that application will immediately be denied because shared housing, short-term shared housing is prohibited in that building. I have links there to include your building in the affidavit and as well to remove your building, to include your building on the list and to remove your building from the list. Both require notarized affidavits. Again, they're both listed under resources on our website. A different type of regulation is the restricted residential zone, or we refer to it as the RRZ. It's obviously bigger than the building. These are entire precincts that can prohibit shared housing. It requires more than just an affidavit from the building owner or authorized agent. It requires 25% of the registered voters in that precinct must sign a petition to be added as an RRZ. It's then introduced as an ordinance to city council that it's voted on, and it constitutes that precinct as an RRZ that prohibits shared housing. This Chicago City Clerk validates and maintains that process. It's nothing that our office does. The city clerk does it. They get the petition waivers. They validate with the Board of Elections to make sure that the people that have signed it are actually part of that precinct and are registered voters. But just like the PBL, any application we get for an address that's successfully listed on the RRZ list will be denied. Okay, so I want to get into another thing. So earlier I talked about the difference between registration numbers and vacation rental licenses. One's a registration, one's a license. There are differences there. Those are comparable because they follow the same ordinance. But there's another license called the Shared Housing Unit Operator's License. Sometimes we call it the operator's license, sometimes we call it the shul. But this is a requirement when a host has more than one registration number. So this is very different than a registration number in terms of it doesn't allow you to list on the platform. All this is really is a requirement if you have more than one registration number. So some things that I wanted to bullet out and highlight is the operator's license does not guarantee an approval for a registration number. And this license does not allow you to list your unit on the platform. An approved registration number is what allows you to list on the platform. The operator's license is what allows you to get more than one registration number, allows you to apply for more than one registration number. So you can apply in person at City Hall with a business consultant, or you can do it online at Chicago Business Direct. So essentially an operator, a shared housing unit operator, is engaging in the business activity of operating more than one shared housing unit. So since that business activity is licensed by the city of Chicago. So if you're operating more than one registration number, more than one shared housing unit, you need to have this license. The link to FAQs about the operator's license is also on our website. Here's a quick slide about if you need it or not. So let's start with the red area. If you have 0 or 1 registration, and all you want is 1, you don't want any more than 1 registration, then you don't need a license at all. All you need is a registration number, input that onto the platform, and you're good. You don't need to be licensed as an operator because you're not operating more than 1 registration, okay? So if 1 is the maximum, no license is needed. Let's skip the yellow for now and go directly to the green. If you have 2 or more registrations, then you are now an operator and you should have this license. You're operating in the business activity of an operator. So you need this license. A lot of times you can't even get to the green unless you get this license already. Backing up a little bit to this yellow area. Say you have 0 or 1. You have 1 registration, we'll say, and you're interested in applying for the 2nd registration. You know, you want more than 1 registration. You might need this shul, the operator's license. This is up to you if you want to apply for it before you apply for the 2nd registration, or if you want to apply for the 2nd registration and find out then you need it. The reason I say that is because you don't know yet if you're going to be approved for the 2nd registration. You still have to apply for the registration. We still have to go through that process, like we talked about, you know, the portal. We still have to make sure it's within the municipal code. And so say you have one registration and you didn't get the operator's license yet. You don't have that license. Then you apply for the 2nd registration and you're going to be approved. At that point, the city will say, you're denied, you have to get this license first. Once you get the license, reapply. And once your license will approve you for the 2nd registration, okay? On the flip side, maybe you have 1 registration and you're like, you know, I want to limit my non-operating time. So I'm going to get this license already so they can't deny me for not having the operator's license. Possible that you have 1 registration already, you are proactive and get the operator's license already, we'll issue it to you. You know, there's really no eligibility process for that. You know, if your intention is to operate more than 1, it's good to get yourself licensed. So say you get that license and then you apply for the 2nd registration, but it doesn't meet the requirements for a shared housing unit. You could be denied for a registration. So at that point, you could have a license that you don't need. You could have the operator's license that you don't need because you weren't approved for the 2nd registration. That's why it's yellow. You know, it's up to you if you want to apply, you know, first, or if you want to wait to see if you're going to be approved for the second. Okay, moving right along to denials. So if you're denied, every denial letter has the option to appeal. All denial reasons have that option. You can apply for the appeal within 10 calendar days of your denial letter, the date on your denial letter. It's also written there. And to appeal the decision, you just simply submit the appeal form that's linked on your denial letter, and include a brief statement, why you're applying for the appeal, why you think we've made an incorrect decision. The onus is on you to prove that we acted outside of the ordinance. Going on to commissioner's adjustments. A commissioner's adjustment is only offered to these three. It's located in a building that's 4 or fewer units, and it's either not your primary residence or you're exceeding the maximum allowable short-term rentals. So if one of those are the reasons that you were denied, then you were able to apply for the commissioner's adjustment. Essentially, that's declaring to us, saying to us, I understand that it's not my primary residence, or I understand that I've met the maximum, but I'm asking for an adjustment or an exception to the law, and I'm asking you to approve my registration, even though it's not my primary residence, or even though I've reached the maximum allowable rentals. You can apply for the commissioner's adjustment within 30 days of your denial letter, if it's offered to you as an option, and the applicant must satisfy the 9 approval criteria to be granted that adjustment. Okay, and this next slide shows the 9 approval criteria. It's a little more involved than applying for an appeal because, again, it's on its face, you're not eligible. You're asking for an adjustment or an exception to the law. So you have to satisfy these 9 approval criteria. And at that point, once you apply, it goes to our commissioner's adjustment team, which is a team of attorneys, and they review each application on their own, make sure that they satisfy those 9 approval criteria. And if they feel like it satisfied that, then they may grant you an approval. They may overturn that denial. If it doesn't satisfy the 9 approval criteria, then the denial may stand. All right. The commissioner's adjustment team will also solicit a recommendation from the alderman that is whose ward is the unit is located in. One of the last things I have is the complaint form. So if you're a neighbor and there's a loud party, or you feel that there's non-compliant or illegal behavior happening in a shared housing unit, I encourage you to submit the shared housing complaint form. Obviously, if there's a safety issue or if there's something emergent that needs to be addressed right away, definitely call 911. If there's public safety that's involved. But if it's something like you feel like there's legal or non-compliant practices in that shared housing unit, I encourage you to submit this form. This complaint form ensures that an investigation is open. All complaints are channeled through the same process, and a paper trail is created. So a history is then created that shows the complaints of that particular unit. If you don't do this, if it's just a phone call or, if it's not logged, then we can't tell that there's been a history of complaints. So a shared housing complaint form for these type of purposes is the best path forward. These complaints go directly to our business compliance enforcement team, our investigations unit, and they get all of them. That information is listed on the complaint form itself, which is also listed on our website. Here's all the links throughout the portal. Again, I know you can't click on them, but they're all listed on our website, chicago.gov/shared housing. Here's my contact information. Again, my name is Greg Wolford. I'm the business consultant supervisor. There's my email, my phone number. But the best way to reach us is the general contact information. Our email address is houseshares with an S, houseshares@cityofchicago.org. And there's also our website that I mentioned throughout the presentation, chicago.gov/shared housing. So any information, definitely go there, and all the links and resources are listed there as well. Other than that, here's information on BACP, but that's the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you very much. And I think Stella, you are proctoring Q&A if there's any questions.
I have a few questions.
Yes, I did. I didn't take pictures that they had.
What are some of the reasons for being denied?
So some of the reasons for being denied, like I mentioned on that, I'll go back to the common eligibility requirements. So these are the main reasons, the main denials that we see. So if it's a building with 4 or fewer units and it's not your their unit is not your primary residence, that'll end up in a denial. Or if that building is already at their maximum capacity, that'll also end up in a denial. Your denial letter will always say why you're being denied. The initial denial letter will always say why you're being denied. Will list that reason there. But these are the main reasons. Again, also the PBL, the RRZ, zoning sometimes is a denial reason. You know, there are some planned development zones that allow shared housing. There are some planned development zones that don't allow shared housing. But these are the main reasons. And if you end up in a denial, refer your denial letter and it states the reason specifically.
I was thinking this would be shared housing, as in I have a house, I want to rent the bedrooms to individuals with the other spaces being shared. Is there a specific title or section for this type of shared housing?
That would be shared housing if it's short term. So anything 31 days or fewer, even if you're living in that unit or house and you're just renting a part of the house, like a bedroom, and there's a shared space like the kitchen or the living room is shared, the bedroom can still be listed as shared housing, and you would apply that way. Go to the portal, submit an application, answer the questions if you know it sounds like it is your primary residence if you're living there, so you can say yes there. But there's a part of the application that says entire dwelling or partial dwelling, at which point you would just say partial dwelling, and list the name. You know, you can put guest room or room number 2 or something like that. But yes, if you're just listing a room and there's common space like a kitchen or a living room, that is shared housing if it's short term.
If you have an LLC already, can you still apply for this?
That's a great question. So per the ordinance, any type of business entity cannot apply for a shared housing registration number. The ordinance says only a natural person can apply for a shared housing registration number. So I know that may differ from what you see on Airbnb. You know, there might be a professional company that is listing your unit, but the applicant is a natural person. But for the city registration purposes, it has to be a natural person. That's one of the nuances that show the difference between registration number and vacation rental licenses. A vacation rental license, even though it follows the same ordinance as eligibility requirements as shared housing, business entity can apply for vacation rental license. So if you want to keep it in your business name, I would suggest the only way to have this type of short-term unit under a business entity is via a vacation rental license. Otherwise, you have to do it under a natural person.
The next question has several parts. If me and my family live on a 4-unit building, how can we still list all of the units? Can I rent them all under my app account since I've already done one for years?
If I'm understanding correctly, it's a 4-unit building that's inhabited by the whole family. But you know, this middle bucket that I'm showing you right now on my screen, a 4-unit building has a maximum of 1 active rental or 1 active dwelling unit. So we'd only approve 1 unless you're approved for the commissioner's adjustment. So for example, there's unit 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you're already approved for unit 1. Once you apply for unit 2, you'll get a denial that says this building is already at maximum active rental capacity. I think that answered the question. I think I understood correctly.
What is a commissioner's adjustment? Can you please talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, the commissioner's adjustment. I'm going to go back to the commissioner's adjustment slide. This is only offered to units that you're applying for that are located in buildings that have 4 units or fewer. And these 3 denial reasons are the only denial reasons the commissioner's adjustment option is offered to. If you're trying to list a unit in a building that has 4 or fewer units, that's not your primary residence, you'll be denied with that option to apply for the commissioner's adjustment. Or if you're in a building that size and you want to exceed the maximum, you can also apply for a commissioner's adjustment. It'll end a denial, which then starts the process if you want to apply for a commissioner's adjustment. Essentially, if you're, it's a way to get an approval or to pursue an approval for an otherwise ineligible unit for these reasons specifically.
Let's say you currently have 1 Airbnb registration, but you want additional units. If you apply for and get approved for the shared housing unit operator license, does the primary residence requirement still apply for the second registration?
Yes, it does. Nothing changes, no rules change. There's the operator's license doesn't get you, it doesn't bypass any of the requirements. All it does is allow you to apply for more than 1 unit. So again, the primary residency requirement are listed right here. So if you're applying for registration number in a building that has 4 units or fewer, it has to be your primary residence. There's no requirement for primary residence for 5 units or more, buildings with 5 units or more. But those requirements don't change regardless if you have the operator's license or if you don't have it. We still follow the municipal code there.
Are CA adjustments actively being accepted?
Yeah, that's actually.
Those that satisfy the requirement. Seems like many home sharing hosts are having a difficult time getting those applications approved.
So those commissioner's adjustment applications are looked at individually. So the important thing to know is that there's no percentage that that team is trying to reach. They're not operating under the guise of, we have to hit 50% of commissioner's adjustments, or, they look at each application individually. So if the approval criteria are satisfied, then they'll issue that approval. If they're not satisfied, then it will result in a denial. So each one is looked at individually. It all really depends on your answers to the approval criteria, the neighbor support you have, the alderman support. All of those factors go into the decision making.
Does a temporary driver's license count if someone has just moved and wanting to apply, but that does not have the permanent driver's license.
And then.
Yes, a temporary driver's license does count.
How long after being denied before a hearing is scheduled?
So that's really volume based, and that's outside of our department. So I can't really speak to timeline too much at that point. If you're appealing the decision that results in a hearing, at that point, it goes to the Department of Law, the attorneys there, and that's volume based. So unfortunately, it's dependent on what their caseload looks like at that time. If it's small, you could get a hearing date sooner than later. If they have a lot of cases, it could be a month or so.
Why can't we use an additional single family home if the owner is in agreement?
So I'm assuming that single family home is not your primary residence. So you cannot list it per the ordinance. The reason for that, kind of the philosophy of the primary residency requirement for single family homes in these smaller buildings, like 4 units or fewer, the philosophy really is areas of the city that are zoned to allow single family homes and 2 flats, for example, are more residential by nature. And the ordinance is designed to try to keep those areas more residential. So we want single family homes to be your primary residence. That way, the host is there on property or can respond to any issues. The impact of the community is far greater for neighborhoods with single family homes in these small buildings. Whereas, for example, here downtown, if there's an Airbnb across the street, I would never know because there's a hotel on every corner where transient occupancy, is the norm here. You're not affected as the impact to the community is much less in a highly densely populated area than a neighborhood. So there are many neighborhoods of single family homes or 2 flats that someone could mow their lawn and a half inch shorter and everyone would know. So the impact is very different.
Are the restrictions on a number of bedrooms or bathrooms needed in a single family home?
The ordinance says that a shared housing unit can only have up to 6 sleeping rooms. So if there's more than 6 sleeping rooms, it's not eligible to be a shared housing unit. There are some stipulations on the occupancy size. I believe it's 125 square feet per person. Only 2 adults are allowed per room. But the specifics are listed in the ordinance and I can't recall them all off the top of my head. But you definitely have to have an accessible working bathroom and accessible working kitchen for it to be considered a legal dwelling unit.
What's the cost for registration number versus vacation rental license?
They're exactly the same. So the price difference is the same. It's $125 if you're approved for a shared housing registration number, and that's annually. So the $125 must be paid each year when you renew, whereas a vacation rental license is $250 for every 2 years. So it equals the exact same amount.
Yeah, the Q&A box. How does non-subsidized free transitional housing fit under the shared housing rule?
And say that again, non-subsidized.
How does non-subsidized free transitional housing fit underneath the shared housing ordinance?
You know, I'm not sure off the top of my head. So if you could email me, take down my contact information, gregory.wolford@cityofchicago.org. I've put it up here on the screen. Shoot me an email and list that information and your address, and I can definitely look into it and get back to you, respond that way. Unfortunately, I would have to look a little bit deeper into that.
What resources is available if it's not answered, if my question is not answered?
Okay, it's already.
Definitely go to our website, chicago.gov/shared housing. All of our documents, public facing materials are linked there. If you do not find it under our resources or FAQs, definitely email me or our inbox or shared inbox at houseshares@cityofchicago.org. And if we don't know the answer, we'll point you in the right direction.
What are the benefits of a registration number? And why would a person apply for a registration number as opposed to going straight through an Airbnb?
So per the ordinance, you have to have a registration number in order to list a short-term rental. It's non-compliant against Chicago law to list a short-term shared housing unit for rent on an internet platform. So you have to get a registration number. Furthermore, licensed platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo won't even let you list your unit without an approved registration number. So, you know, the platform is in compliance in that they require that registration number in order to list for short term. We frequently, you know, delist if there's a non-compliant registration. We have a registry that they have access to for approved registration numbers.
I selected Airbnb and I got a registration number, but I was denied for the Airbnb. When I sent the email answer, the answer I got was that one registration was good for both.
That is correct, but only if you select both. So if you did not select Vrbo, then we don't give that information to Vrbo per your recommendation on your application. If you want to list on Vrbo, then go back to the portal and submit the exact same application, just select Vrbo, submit that to us, and we will link it and send you the exact same registration number. If you're approved already for Airbnb, you don't have to pay anything extra. We'll link them together and then we'll add you to that registry. But yeah, so again, we only share what you select. So we're not going to tell Vrbo your information unless you select that.
How many houses may I have for an Airbnb? And are the regulations really strict?
You use the term houses, but I'm going to use the term shared housing units. So there's currently no maximum for how many units you can be approved for, but they have to fall within our eligibility requirements. So for example, if you apply for 20 single family homes, a requirement for single family homes is that they're your primary residence. So all 20 cannot be your primary residence. So they would be the ones that are not your primary residence would be denied. So potentially if you lived in one, you would get one approval and the other 19 would be denied. So there's no maximum, but you have to fall within the eligibility requirements that we outlined here and are listed in the ordinance.
What are the legal disciplinary actions for renting a unit without a registration or license?
Good question. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but there is a citation and an associated fine with listing a unit without an approved registration number. That's listed in the ordinance, which is on our website. I don't have that off the top of my head, but feel free to shoot me an email with that specific question, and I can look it up for you if you don't look it up and get you an answer. But again, it's just not off the top of my head.
I think we answered most of them. Here's the last one. How are large management companies with multiple Airbnbs listing able to operate?
So if it can look like a large company is listing on the platform, but like I mentioned earlier, potentially it could be a large company managing that listing, where the actual registrant or applicant is, the homeowner or the leaseholder. Aside from that, if a company is within the eligibility requirements, then they can get those approvals. Like I mentioned earlier, there's not a maximum of units they can have, but they have to fall within those eligibility requirements. So if a large company, for example, is trying to list in 4-flat and it's not their primary residence, they're not going to get that registration because of the primary residency requirement. So again, they have to follow the same eligibility requirements that everyone else does. But I think you said, Stella, that was the last one?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar. I really appreciate it. Again, our website was just redone, so chicago.gov/shared housing. Visit that for information, or feel free to email houseshares@city-of-chicago or contact me directly if you have any specific questions. We'd be happy to respond to you.
All right, thank you, Greg.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.